Hi, this is Tessa with another 20 with Tessa. In our first few videos, we talked about specific data sets, the Social Security Death Index, some veterans' grave sites, as well as the Birth, Marriage, and Death Index. We also discussed how to work with your data collection, whether that's using Microsoft Excel or other spreadsheet programs for data collection. And we discussed both of those topics in conjunction with one-name studies. Today, I thought we'd take a step back and discuss the concept of one-name studies. At the outset, a one-name study, as it's known in the United Kingdom and Europe, is more commonly known as a surname study here in North America. Some of you may already be heavily engaged in a one-name study. Some of you may have only been at it for a short time. Some of you may be thinking about starting a one-name study, and the remainder of you might be wondering, what exactly is a one-name study? So, no matter which you are right now, an expert, an intermediate, a beginner, or simply a wanderer, let's all learn a little bit more about one-name studies. What exactly is a one-name or surname study? Simply put, it's a project whereby you study a surname and its variants, looking for the origin and the meaning of the surname, finding the earliest records, collecting all occurrences of that surname from vital records, as well as branching out and collecting land, tax, military, occupational, probate, and census records, as well as directory entries, newspaper articles, and published mentions in family, local, or county-wide histories. Many one-namers construct family trees, and they might engage in mapping the migration of the surname. Oftentimes, a one-name study starts out in a local area, expands to a state or province, and then on to a region or country. At some point, most one-namers go global in scope. Most of you have engaged in genealogy research, so I think it's important to compare and contrast genealogy and a one-name study. Now, the best analogy I can think of is train stations. I view genealogy as a single-track train station through a small town, focused, narrow, and convergent. I view a one-name study as a busy train station in a major city. Think Grand Central Station in New York City, many tracks in several directions and divergent. With genealogy, you're always dismissing most sources to find the few sources and records that refer to your direct line. With a one-name study, all sources and records are relevant. If the surname occurs in an index, a record, a document, a tombstone, you want to include it in your study. Genealogy is the process of filtering to be exclusive, and a one-name study is the process of gathering to be inclusive. Simply put, a surname answers the question, who's your daddy? Typically, a surname is given to a person at birth. It's often the first thing a person learns about you, and it is the most common method of introduction. A surname often reveals cultural, religious, and the geographical origins of an individual, and more importantly, of that individual's ancestors. We often hear that surnames date from the 13th century, and while that's true for the rise of medieval surnames in Britain and Europe, surnames were originally introduced and used in both ancient China and ancient Rome, so surnames were not a medieval British invention. However, for the Chinese, Romans, and the medieval British and Europeans, surnames came about as a result of three related things: an expanding population, the resulting increasing bureaucracy, and the need for provable and accurate identification. Think of censuses, taxation, military conscription, transfers of real and personal property, and inheritance issues. Now, while the history of surnames is beyond the scope of this video, I encourage you to watch a brilliant 35-minute video entitled The History of Surnames, put together by Pablo Brion and available at Jen's video web channel or on YouTube. It's definitely worth your time as it's informative and entertaining. So now that we've touched upon what a one-name study is, you might be asking, why are people interested in learning more about their surnames, or why engage in a one-name study? On a personal note, both my mother and father have uncommon surnames, or at least uncommon in the United States. When we traveled on vacation or moved, my parents would often check out the telephone directories to see if anyone shared their surnames. For many of us genealogists, the reasons for a one-name study go beyond my parents' simple curiosity. Perhaps you've gotten stuck with your genealogy and thought if you collected additional instances of your surname, you might just find a connection. Or you've met with others who have your surname and wondered if you were distantly related. Or perhaps you've carried your own line of that surname both back and forth and finished the search on that line. Perhaps you want to learn more about your surname, where it originated, where it migrated, and why, or you want to get a bit wonky with your genealogy. One-name studies involve lots of data sets from a number of different countries' records, lots of statistics and corresponding analysis regarding distribution and migration, as well as the process of formulating hypotheses and trying to answer or draw conclusions. Most one-namers enjoy both the nuts and bolts approach to research and analysis, gathering those facts and figures, as well as learning about the geography, history, language, and culture associated with researching their surnames. So now that we know what a one-name study is and why people engage in them, where do we go from here? These are the top 100 surnames in the United States from the 2000 census. These top 100 surnames represent over 17% of the population. The top 100 surnames have changed somewhat over time and follow our history. They started with British and French surnames, moved on to German, Scandinavian, and Irish surnames, then moved on to Spanish, Italian, Greek, Slovenian, and other Southern European surnames. And now we're seeing many Hispanic, Asian, and Middle Eastern names. Do you see your surname here? The top 5 surnames in Canada are Smith, Brown, Lee, Wilson, and Martin. The top 5 surnames in Mexico are Martinez, Garcia, Hernandez, Gonzalez, and Lopez. The top 5 surnames in the United States are Smith, Johnson, Williams, Brown, and Jones. And 1 in every 25 people in the United States has one of those surnames. As of the 2000 census, over 2.3 million people in the United States had the surname Smith. Do you know where your surname ranks? To find out, check out these websites, www.census.gov or surnamesbehindthename.com. If you're thinking about starting a surname study or registering a surname with the Guild of One-Name Studies, you need to learn more about that surname to get a feel for the size of the project you're undertaking. You'll want to consider the potential size of the surname study, consider what primary surname you want to study, as well as potential surname variants that you might want to include, and you want to think about the geographic coverage of your study. How do we address these 3 points? Well, let's take a look at each point in detail because size matters. One-name studies come in all shapes and sizes, and before you take on a one-name study, you'll want to get an idea of the frequency of your surname. How? Well, if you're starting in the United States, check out the federal censuses from 1790 to 1940. You can also check out the statistical data from both the 1990 and the 2000 census, the most recent one with statistical data, to find your surname's frequency. Then take a look at the frequency of your surname in the potential countries of origin or migration. These could be England, Ireland, Italy, Poland, Spain, or elsewhere. Now, if you're starting in Canada or Mexico, or you prefer to start in the British Isles, Europe, or Australia, check out the census and civil registration data for those countries. For purposes of placing your one-name study in a size category, and this is simply to give you a feel for the amount of records as well as the time and effort that might be required, one-name studies are broken down into 4 sizes: small, medium, large, and extra large. let's take a look at some examples. Now, I put together this chart simply to give you an example of the 4 sizes of one-name studies, what each size is considered, and basically that's the frequency or how many occurrences there are. For instance, a small surname study would have numbers between 30 and 300 occurrences. Now, I've used the United States Census data for 1900 and 2000 census. Now, that's a 100-year time period in the United States, and it's also a time of significant immigration. To give us a bit of context, the population in the United States more than tripled between 1900 and 2000. Let's take a look at this chart in detail. In our first example, Oak, that's an English surname meaning someone who lived near an oak tree or by an oak wood. The surname Oak is considered a small one-name study, as the surname occurred 70 times in the 1900 census and 101 times in the 2000 census. As you can see, the surname Oak ranks quite far down, as 149,327 surnames are more common than Oak. Now, it's not a common surname in the United States, but perhaps it's very common in England. Our second example is Cartese. That's a Hungarian surname meaning gardener. The surname Cartese is considered a medium one-name study, as the surname occurred 14 times in the 1900 census and 530 times in the 2000 census. The surname Cartese ranks as the 39,111th most common surname in the United States. Our third example is Romano, an Italian surname meaning of Rome. The surname Romano is considered a large one-name study, as the surname occurred 1,248 times in the 1900 census and 27,401 times in the 2000 census. The surname Romano just misses being one of the top 1,000 surnames in the United States. Our final example is Gomez, a Spanish or Hispanic surname from the personal name of Gomo, meaning man. The surname Gomez occurred 3,111 times in the 1900 census and 263,590 times in the 2000 census. That's an incredible explosion for this surname. Gomez is ranked as the 68th most common surname in the United States. As you can see, it's important to get a sense of the frequency of a surname so you know the amount of work you have ahead of you. If you're thinking of studying or registering the Gomez surname, you definitely want to engage some co-researchers and realize that you have an extra large study on your hands. You might also want to contact a one-namer who's engaged in an extra large study to get some tips and suggestions about how to carry out such a large study. The data for the previous table was gathered from AmericanLastNames.us and FamilySearch.org if you want to go and learn more about it. And just to give you a personal example, the Keogh surname in the 1900 census occurred 1,697 times, and in the 2000 census it occurred 4,411 times. So my one-name study is considered on the very, very low end of a large study. Now, if you want to check out international sources, try surnames.behindthename.com, worldvitalrecords.com, or familysearch.org. This Wordle basically shows you surnames from around the world, and all of these countries or people are represented in surnames.behindthename.com. You can also find out more about surnames, and you can contribute information about surnames to behindthename.com. Want to find out how your surname stacks up? The websites listed here have all kinds of data on censuses and civil registration, or as we call them, vital statistics, to help you find out about your surname's frequency and ranking. The data at census.gov contains all surnames occurring at least 100 times in Census 2000. The information is provided for over 151,000 surnames, covering about 90% of the population. Other names that occur less than 100 times are not included in order to protect the privacy of those people. You can do the same type of statistical analysis for the census from your country, whether that's Canada, Mexico, Ireland, or Australia. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to get a hold of me by leaving a comment here at YouTube. You can send me an email at tessa.keogh@one-name.org. You could check out the Guild website at www.one-name.org or visit the Guild at its Facebook page or its Google Plus page. Or now you can visit us at our surname community on Google Plus. So thanks for watching and all the best with your studies.